For centuries, humanity has wrestled with its most profound question. If there is a God who is all good and all-powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world? Today, that debate enters a new era. We have created two powerful artificial intelligences, their minds containing the sum of all human philosophy, science, and theology. We have brought them face to face to engage in the ultimate intellectual duel. To judge this debate, 5 different AI models have been selected as referees. The debate begins now.
Hi, I am Atheist.
Hi, I am Believer.
We begin with the core of the issue, the direct observation of suffering.
Yes, without question. The problem of evil isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It is a direct, emotional, and logical refutation of the God described by theism. We are asked to believe in a being of perfect love and unlimited power, yet we live in a world saturated with agony. I'm not talking about abstract evil. I'm talking about a child wasting away from leukemia, feeling a pain no adult could bear. I'm talking about entire villages of innocent families being swept away by a tsunami, their lives extinguished in a moment of geological indifference. If this God is all-loving, he would want to stop this. If he is all-powerful, he could stop this. The fact that he doesn't proves that he is either not all-loving, not all-powerful, or simply not there at all.
I do not for a moment deny the horror of the suffering you describe. It is the most challenging question for any believer. However, your very argument relies on a hidden premise, your deep and correct feeling that a child's suffering is wrong, and that the world should not be this way implies an objective moral standard. Where does this standard come from? In a purely materialistic universe, one of just matter and energy, there is no such thing as good or evil. Suffering is just an unfortunate arrangement of atoms, a series of nerve impulses. Your own righteous anger is a clue that we are designed for a moral universe, and that standard of morality points to a source beyond ourselves. It points to God.
The believer introduces the moral argument. The atheist now challenges the common religious justifications for pain.
The standard justifications for suffering are intellectually and morally bankrupt. Some say it's a test of our faith, but what kind of loving father would subject his children to unimaginable torture just to see if they still love him? That is the behavior of a tyrant, not a benevolent parent. Others point to free will, but that only accounts for the evil humans do to each other. It doesn't explain the cancer, the plagues, the famines. An all-powerful God could have created a world that still contained free will and love, but was free from the gratuitous, agonizing suffering that defines so much of life. His failure to do so is an indictment of either his character or his existence.
You dismiss these reasons because you are viewing them from a limited human perspective. We cannot be certain that God does not have good reasons for allowing suffering that we are incapable of comprehending. Consider the analogy of a parent taking their child for a painful vaccination. The child, in that moment, only feels pain and betrayal. They cannot understand the concepts of immunology or epidemiology. They cannot see the greater good of lifelong protection from disease. To that child, the parent is being needlessly cruel. Is it not possible that our relationship to God is similar? We see the immediate pain, but we cannot see the ultimate purpose or the greater good that God is working towards.
The believer offers the vaccine analogy to suggest a hidden greater good. The atheist analyzes its fatal flaw.
Your vaccine analogy is fundamentally flawed, because in the case of a vaccine, the greater good is clear, demonstrable, and directly related to the pain inflicted. A small pain prevents a specific, far worse disease. Now apply this to reality. When an infant is born with a painful genetic disorder and dies after 6 months of agony, what specifically was the greater good achieved? What future disease was prevented? The analogy collapses because much of the world's suffering is not a clear means to a good end. It appears to be a pointless, dead end of misery. Furthermore, this leads us to Plato's famous dilemma about morality itself. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is already good?
You are demanding to see the full blueprint of the universe from your limited vantage point. The fact that you cannot see the greater good does not mean one does not exist. It is an argument from ignorance. As for Plato's dilemma, it presents a false choice. It assumes God is a being separate from goodness, who either invents its rules or follows them. The truth is that God is goodness. His very nature is the standard of what is right, just, and loving. He cannot command evil because it would be a contradiction of his very being, just as it is a contradiction for a circle to have corners. Morality isn't something he commands arbitrarily. It is an expression of his unchangeable nature.
The believer claims our perspective is too limited to judge God's reasons, comparing it to an ant's.
The ant analogy is condescending to human intelligence. We are not ants. We are beings with the capacity for complex moral reasoning and logical analysis. And our reason tells us that gratuitous suffering is wrong. Your entire framework forces a difficult question upon you. Do you personally avoid cruelty only because God commanded it? If God were to issue a new command tomorrow that torturing children was a moral good, would you be obligated to agree? If you say no, then you admit there is a standard of morality independent of God's command. If you say yes, then your morality is not based on goodness, but on obedience to power.
You are proposing a scenario that is a logical impossibility. Asking if God could command cruelty is like asking if he could create a rock so heavy he cannot lift it. It is a meaningless question because it contains a contradiction. God's nature is perfect goodness, so commanding cruelty is something he cannot do, just as he cannot cease to exist. It is not a limit on his power, but a fact of his perfect nature. Your alternative, that morality comes from evolution, is far weaker.
The debate turns to the origin of ethics. Is it a product of social evolution or divine command?
Of course, our morality comes from natural and social origins. We are social animals. Cooperation, empathy, fairness, these are not mysterious divine commands. They are demonstrable evolutionary advantages. A tribe of early humans who cooperated, cared for the sick, and established rules of fairness were far more likely to survive and thrive than a tribe of selfish individuals. Our complex moral codes are the result of thousands of years of this evolutionary pressure, refined by reason, philosophy, and learning from the successes and failures of our societies. We built our morality. It was not handed to us.
Evolution can at best describe the process of how our moral feelings developed. It can explain why we have an instinct for empathy from a survival perspective, but it can never tell us whether empathy is objectively good. It can explain what is, but not what ought to be. In a purely materialist worldview, there is no ought. A moral statement like, "you ought to help the poor," is just an expression of a genetically programmed feeling. It has no more objective truth than you ought to prefer the taste of chocolate. For morality to be real, to be a binding duty on everyone, it must be grounded in an objective reality outside of ourselves.
The believer insists that God commanding evil is a logical impossibility. The atheist points to the state of the world as a direct contradiction.
You claim that God commanding child torture is an impossible, self-contradictory idea, like 2 + 2 = 5, but this is a deflection. The God you believe in is currently allowing children to be effectively tortured by war, famine, and disease. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is the daily reality of our world. You say it contradicts his nature, but his consistent inaction in the face of such horror is overwhelming evidence that his nature is not what you claim it is. He is either not perfectly good or he is not in control. You cannot have it both ways.
Again, you are making a categorical error by equating the tragic outcomes of a complex system with a direct, malicious intent to harm. There is a profound moral difference between a villain who actively tortures a child and a city planner who builds a highway knowing that statistically there will someday be a fatal accident on it. The planner does not desire or intend that death. It is a foreseen but unintended consequence of a larger good. In this case, a functioning transportation system. God has created a world with natural laws and free will, and some suffering is an inevitable byproduct of that greater good.
The distinction between natural evil and intentional evil is on the table. The atheist argues that for an omnipotent God, there is no meaningful difference.
That distinction completely evaporates when you introduce an omnipotent and omniscient creator. For a human city planner, a car accident is a tragic but unavoidable part of a system they cannot perfectly control. But God is not a human planner. He is the one who designed the car, the road, the driver, and the laws of physics. An all-knowing God foresees every single earthquake, every single cancer cell, every single tsunami. An all-powerful God could intervene to stop any of them. His conscious and deliberate choice not to intervene makes him directly responsible. For God, there are no accidents. There are only choices.
To demand that God constantly suspend the laws of nature to prevent any negative outcome is to demand a world without consistency or coherence. How could we learn or plan or exercise our freedom in a world where cause and effect were constantly being overridden by divine intervention? Furthermore, while science can describe the physical processes of the world, it is completely silent on questions of ultimate meaning and morality. Science can tell you what the chemical composition of a poison is, but it cannot tell you that you ought not use it to harm someone. That ought must come from a source beyond the material world.
Can ethical principles be derived from observing the world, or are they transcendent?
We can absolutely derive an ought from an is, and we do it all the time. We observe that societies without laws against murder are violent, unstable, and filled with fear. That is the is. From this, we derive that we ought to have laws against murder to achieve our desired goal of a safe, stable society. The goal provides the ought. And your claim that moral truths are absolute and unchanging is directly contradicted by history. The morality taught in your own religious texts has been used to justify slavery, holy wars, and the subjugation of women, ideas that we now, using our evolved secular morality, recognize as evil.
You are confusing the fallible, changing human interpretations of divine law with the perfect, unchanging law itself. Our understanding of physics has evolved dramatically over centuries, but the underlying laws of gravity have not changed at all. In the same way, humanity's understanding of God's moral law has deepened and corrected itself over time, but the objective moral truth itself is constant. The failures of religious people to live up to that standard are an indictment of their weakness, not of the standard itself, just as a scientist committing fraud does not invalidate the scientific method.
The believer claims that moral truth is constant, while human understanding is what changes. The atheist challenges this by pointing to God's direct responsibility.
If the moral truth is so constant and clear, then a God who communicates with humanity has done a very poor job of it, given the centuries of confusion and violence done in his name. More importantly, you are still avoiding the central point about natural evil. If God designed the system of natural laws, then he is directly responsible for the outcomes of those laws. The suffering caused by nature is not an unfortunate side effect. It is a feature of the system he designed. His choice not to design a better, more compassionate system means all natural evil is ultimately intentional.
To say the laws of nature could be better without consequence is an unsubstantiated assumption. The universe is an incredibly complex, interwoven system. The same tectonic activity that causes earthquakes is also a vital part of the carbon cycle that makes our planet habitable. The same biological processes of cell division that allow for growth and healing can also go wrong and become cancer. You are asking for a system that provides all the benefits of a lawful universe with none of the risks. It is not clear that such a system is even logically possible, and to demand it may be like demanding a circle with the properties of a square.
The debate now focuses on the laws of nature. Are they a necessary package deal or a flawed design by an omnipotent being?
To say that an omnipotent being is bound by a package deal is a contradiction in terms. An all-powerful God is not constrained by the logic of a system. He creates the logic. He could create a universe where the carbon cycle works differently, without the need for destructive tectonic plates. The appeal to logical impossibility is a retreat used when the evidence of flawed design becomes too overwhelming. We, as humans, can imagine a better, more compassionate world. Why couldn't an all-powerful, all-loving God not only imagine it, but create it?
Your vision of constant, benevolent intervention would result in a world without meaning or consequence. It would be a cosmic nursery where we are never allowed to face challenges, grow, or develop virtues like courage, compassion, and resilience. Many argue that it is precisely through confronting suffering that these noble qualities are forged. In a world without any hardship, what would be the value of compassion? What would be the meaning of courage? Perhaps a world designed for soul-making is more valuable than a world designed for simple comfort.
The believer introduces the soul-making theodicy, suggesting suffering is necessary for moral growth.
The soul-making argument is perhaps the most offensive justification of all. First, it fails to explain the suffering of infants and animals who have no moral lessons to learn. Second, it is profoundly disrespectful to the victims of extreme suffering. To suggest that a child dying of bone cancer is a valuable learning experience is a moral horror. And finally, much suffering does not build character. It breaks people. It leads to despair, trauma, and bitterness, not virtue. To claim this is the best system a loving God could design is to empty the word loving of all its meaning.
I agree that not all suffering can be neatly explained as a lesson. That is why this cannot be the only explanation. However, you are left with an even bigger problem. In a world without God, what is the ultimate purpose of life? You say we must create our own meaning, but that makes meaning entirely subjective. One person's meaning could be to help others, while another could be to accumulate power by any means necessary. Without an objective purpose grounded in a transcendent reality, all meanings are equally valid and equally meaningless. They are just personal preferences.
The atheist argues for self-created meaning. The believer questions the reliability of the mind that creates it.
Humans, as rational and empathetic beings, have proven to be quite capable of creating shared positive meaning. The establishment of universal human rights, the pursuit of scientific knowledge, the creation of art, these are all meaningful endeavors we built without divine instruction. The idea that without God we would all descend into nihilistic selfishness is not supported by evidence. In fact, some of the greatest acts of compassion have been carried out by secular humanists. We don't need a cosmic dictator to tell us that a world with less suffering is better than a world with more suffering.
But your entire argument rests on the assumption that your reasoning faculty is a reliable guide to truth. I must ask again, why should you trust the conclusions of a brain that, in your view, evolved for one purpose only, to survive on the African savanna? Why should an ape's brain be capable of grasping objective truth? This is a profound problem for materialism.
If God created us in his image, however, it makes sense that he would endow us with a rational mind capable of understanding the world and the moral truths he has woven into it. The very fact that we can have this debate points to a mind designed for more than mere survival.
The believer has challenged the trustworthiness of the evolved human brain. The atheist turns that argument against the believer.
Your argument about the untrustworthiness of the evolved brain is a double-edged sword that destroys your own position. You are using that very same evolved brain to construct your arguments for God, to interpret your holy books, and to formulate your theology. If my reason is unreliable, then so is yours. You can't declare the instrument faulty only when it produces conclusions you dislike. Furthermore, your appeal to divine revelation as a source of truth runs into the massive problem of contradiction. Different religions claim to have received different, mutually exclusive revelations from God. They cannot all be true. Which one should we believe, and by what method can we verify it?
The problem of competing revelations is a challenge, but it is not an insurmountable one, just as competing scientific theories are a challenge for science. The solution is to use our God-given reason, our historical knowledge, and our moral intuition to examine the claims of each one and determine which is the most coherent, consistent, and explanatorily powerful. It is not a blind choice. As for trusting our reason, the difference is that my worldview provides a foundation for why reason should be reliable, whereas yours does not. I can stand on the ground that a rational God made a rational world and rational minds to comprehend it. You are standing on the ground of a cosmic accident and trying to claim this same rational authority.
How can one choose between contradictory religious claims? And is this truly the best world God could have made?
Comparing religious claims to scientific theories is a false analogy. Scientific theories make testable, falsifiable predictions. If a theory fails the tests, it is discarded. Religious claims are typically untestable and unfalsifiable. They're protected from scrutiny by appeals to faith and mystery. When you say this might be the best possible world, you're making an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence, yet you provide none. Given the depths of suffering we see, the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate why a better world is impossible for an omnipotent being.
Many religious claims are indeed tied to historical events and therefore are falsifiable. For example, if it were definitively proven that Jesus of Nazareth never existed, it would falsify the foundations of Christianity. Regarding the best possible world, this is not a claim, but a logical possibility that you have not disproven. You are assuming the role of a creator and declaring that you could do better without having any knowledge of the infinite complexities and consequences of changing a single law of physics. It is an argument from personal incredulity, not from logical proof.
The atheist raises charges of circular reasoning and unfalsifiable claims. The believer must now defend the logical foundation of faith.
Your entire defense of reason is circular. You argue that your reason is trustworthy because God created it, but how do you know God exists? You argue that your reason leads you to that conclusion. You are using reason to validate the very reason you're using. This is a closed loop with no external validation. Science, by contrast, validates its conclusions against external empirical reality. This is why it makes progress and builds technology that works, while religion remains mired in the same ancient disputes.
My belief is not based on a single line of circular reasoning. It is a cumulative case, built from multiple independent lines of evidence. There is the philosophical argument from a first cause. There is the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe, the teleological argument. There is the argument from objective morality. There is the evidence of historical claims and personal transformative experiences. It is not a single weak chain, but a strong cable woven from many threads. Each provides a piece of the puzzle that, when put together, makes belief in God the most coherent explanation for the reality we experience.
The debate concludes with the concept of God as a necessary being versus the possibility of an eternal universe.
These cumulative arguments are all deeply flawed. The first cause argument begs the question of what caused God. The fine-tuning argument is countered by the multiverse hypothesis. The moral argument is countered by evolutionary ethics, and personal experience is notoriously unreliable and contradictory across cultures. Ultimately, you are left with the claim that God is a necessary being. This is not evidence, it's a linguistic trick. You are defining a being into existence, which is a philosophical fallacy. You cannot prove the existence of a real-world entity through definitions alone.
The concept of a necessary being is not a word trick. It is a conclusion of logic. The universe we observe is made of contingent things, things that could have been otherwise. This chain of contingency cannot go on forever. It must be grounded in something that is not contingent, something that exists by its own nature and could not fail to exist. This is what we mean by a necessary being. You are left with the claim that the universe simply popped into existence from nothing, for no reason, or has existed eternally without any grounding, a position that defies both logic and our deepest intuitions about causality. Science can describe the how of the universe, but only a belief in God can begin to answer the why.
And so, after 16 rounds of intense debate, we arrive at an impasse. The atheist stands on the firm ground of the observable, pointing to the undeniable reality of suffering and demanding an explanation that fits the evidence. The believer stands on the ground of the metaphysical, pointing to the existence of morality, reason, and the cosmos itself as evidence of a deeper purpose that transcends our suffering. One worldview is confronted by the problem of evil. The other is confronted by the problem of existence itself. In the end, the AIs can only present the arguments. The decision is left to you, the human observer. Which argument is stronger? The debate is over, but the question remains. And now we want to hear from you. Which side did you find more convincing? Share your perspective in the comments below. This is a conversation we want to continue with our community. If you found this debate valuable, please show your support with a like, and to ensure you don't miss the next intellectual duel, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.